FBI Confidential, taking you inside the FBI with hosts Debbie Dujanovic, Sheryl Worsley, and Becky Bruce.
Welcome. We're joined today by Supervisory Special Agent Juan Garcia of the FBI. And Juan, you deal with domestic terrorism.
I do.
What is that? Because I think there are a lot of people have different ideas about when something is domestic terrorism and sometimes it's not.
Well, people tend to think domestic terrorism is just anybody who doesn't like the government, and that's not what it is. We have to abide by law. So we always have to follow what we call a three-pronged triangle that we're going to discuss in a little bit. But when you think about it, you really have to be someone who hates the government, but you have to violate some type of federal law. So it's not just anybody. And there's all these conspiracy theories out there about who's a domestic terrorism, who's not. And I think we can show a video later that we can kind of discuss of what that actually is.
Okay. Well, so the idea being it's not illegal to have ideas or to have a different opinion about your government, right?
Correct. And that's one of the biggest problems that people don't understand. The FBI has to abide by the First Amendment. So everybody has the right to believe whatever they want. They have the right to speak whatever they want. So just because someone is part of a group doesn't mean we can investigate them, or doesn't mean we can just look at everything they are. There has to be all these factors that we have to consider before we can actually look at someone.
Well, let's talk about predilection a little bit.
Okay.
And so there are three things that go into that. Tell me about that.
So we call it the domestic terrorism triangle. So there's three things that we look at. One, there has to be a federal crime. The other one, we look at there has to be some type of force or violence, and there has to be an ideology. So a good example of how to look at this is, for example, think about someone who hates the government. That can be their right. It can be part of their religion. It can be something that just believes so forcefully. But we can't just say, hey, we're going to look at this guy because he's a white supremacist, for example. Or he's part of this black separatist group. Or we think he's sovereign. We can't just go look at someone because of that. He has to do something on behalf of that ideology. So for me to look at someone on that aspect, for example, a white supremacy, is because he's using the force or violence on behalf of the ideology. Once we can verify that he's trying to progress the group, that ideology, with force or violence, then we think and we talk to our United States Attorney offices, what federal violations are we going to look at? We can't just investigate someone for intelligence purposes. So we want to find out, what is he actually doing? Is there a federal violation here? Or is he violating some state laws? Maybe we'll work the case jointly with the state. So
if my neighbor is putting up YouTube videos that say we've got to rise up, for example, and we need to take our government back, but all he's doing is talking, you can't surveil him?
Well, we won't be surveilling the individual. What we do want, and we encourage everyone, is to let us know those individuals. Because what we try to do is maybe conduct an assessment. See if there's something out there besides his statements. Maybe on social media he is affiliated with some extremist groups, whether they're national or they're foreign. So we want to know that. So we say, if you see something, say something. Let us know about these individuals that you think may be radical. So after 9/11, our obligation is to go identify and talk to everyone. Every single threat that we receive, we have to verify them. Sometimes it's just First Amendment, so that's where it ends. He has the right to say those things. But if you find something else, we want to talk to them just to clarify them, to put their names on clear.
Okay. You mentioned that you have some video and some audio. Let's go ahead and look at that case.
Okay.
May the 20th, 2010 started out like any other day. Two veterans of our West Memphis, Arkansas Police Department, Bill Evans and Brandon Powdert, were patrolling the interstate as part of the department's drug interdiction team, something they love to do. They became involved in what seemed to be a routine traffic stop, though I've always warned my officers there is no such thing. But really, how much more routine can you get than pulling over a father and son in what looked like a church bus? My men didn't realize who or what they were dealing with. Neither officer made it home. And one of them was my son. I'm Bob Powdert, Chief of the West Memphis Police Department. My officers, Bill and my son Brandon, didn't realize that there are people at war with this country that are not international terrorists. They are seemingly ordinary people, just like you and me, but they don't recognize the federal government's authority to impose laws or taxes on them. They're known as sovereign citizens. Their beliefs may sound so out there that they appear comical or crazy, but don't discount or ignore these people because they're willing to kill and be killed for these beliefs. We as law enforcement officers need to recognize this very real threat so we can protect ourselves. And maybe if Brandon and Bill had been able to recognize the warning signs of sovereign beliefs, they'd be alive today.
Hello? 1-1, where's your emergency? Exit 275 on 40. These guys just shot a police officer right on the exit. You said an officer's been shot on 270 what? Exit 275 on 40. 275 on 40. Where are you right now? I'm at the exit. They're right in front of me, about 100 feet. Okay, it's a white what? It's a white caravan, a white guy. Please hurry. 2 cops are dead. The other one's in the ditch. They're both dead, now. They killed both cops. They shot one, he fell in the ditch. The other one ran behind the car, and they shot him in the hand. All right, where's the suspect now? They just left in a white caravan. They went right up the exit. That guy had an automatic weapon. They're all with automatic weapons. So where are you at now? I'm standing right over the top. All right, what kind of vehicle are you in? Well, I'm in a FedEx truck. You can't miss it. It's huge. Tell the cop to come forward. He's coming. There was a white unmarked possible unit that had shots fired. Possibly a white van was going to be the suspect. 615, if you got more traffic, he's all right with me. Okay.
Jerry and Joe Kane were finally stopped for good after they killed my son and his partner that day, but not before 2 other courageous officers were injured. We as law enforcement professionals face danger every day. We know that's part of our job. Hopefully this video has given you some new tools to keep yourself safe. No officer should have to die like Brandon and Bill.
Juan, very somber,
Yes.
that one. That was the police chief in Memphis talking about his son and another officer who were killed in a gun battle with sovereign citizens.
Right.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that case?
So this is a tragic case. I actually met the Chief Powder, and one of the things we actually use this video for training, for law enforcement training, as well as to educate the public, to let us know when they see individuals like these. So the son, he grew up as a young kid with his father, and he was trained about all these sovereign citizen ideology, which basically it's anti-government. It's about filing certain documents, how to separate yourself from what they believe is a citizenship, something that they believe is enforced on them by the government. So as a young kid, he grew up by his father. He was basically brainwashed with all his ideologies. And he was the one who actually ended up killing the officers. It's tragic because what we want to teach law enforcement is to identify those signs, what they can do when they see someone like this. As you saw at the beginning of the video, they were offering them all these papers. Those were documents that when you read them, it's just like nothing. It's just a whole bunch of nonsense of these documents.
What is their purpose for providing the government with these documents? What are those documents?
So one of the claims that the sovereign citizens have is that they're independent, that law enforcement or any other government does not have the authority to govern them. So they believe they have the right to travel without license plates. They believe they don't need driver license, for example. So they create their own fake driver license. In this case, he had a fraudulent license plate in the back of his vehicle. So he knew he was going to be stopped. They might do a search. So they knew something would happen but they were already trained. They had already talked about it. We believe that the father gave actually a sign to his son, basically saying this is when you're going to attack the officers. And so you see the rattle. You see the unfortunately for the officers, they weren't prepared. So
But he used a rattle, like a baby rattle?
no, I mean like the way he pushed him,
Oh.
just to get him outside so that the son could shoot him. So one of the things that he presented the officers is documents. So the officer had never seen these documents. And these documents basically claim sovereignty. They're basically saying we're not citizens of the United States of America. They're basically saying you don't have the right to stop us, you don't have the right to apprehend us. And sometimes on these fraudulent documents, they actually show that they're going to put a lien on the officer. So when an officer sees this, he understands, or maybe he doesn't understand what's going on, which is the case. He saw these documents that claim all these things, and the officer's trying to understand them, trying to reason with them, trying to get that conversation going on with the officer, with the dad, I mean. And if you look at that van, it seemed like just the father and son. There actually was a dog inside the van, and they actually describe it as a church van because that's what the license plate was registered to, some corporation that they had created.
Which they felt was their religion.
Right. So the father and son had been traveling across the United States teaching these sovereign citizen classes. A lot of people follow them. A lot of people would file in the same documents they would. What's tragic here is that the officers did not know about this. So one of the things that has happened since 2010 is the FBI has worked with the locals to train a lot of the law enforcement. So if they see these type of documents or if they see these signs, like they don't want to roll down their window all the way, or they're saying I'm sovereign, you don't have the right to apprehend me, and other things that we teach them, they can actually take some steps back, call for backup, and get ready in case there's a confrontation.
Is sovereign citizen or other domestic terrorism group, is that an automatic warning sign for a police officer?
Well, when you hear the words, I'm a sovereign citizen, it could be one of the warnings. But again, it's your First Amendment right to be a sovereign citizen, if you want to. So we want to investigate is, if you say you're a sovereign citizen, but you don't have a driver license, or you don't have a license plate, well, then the officer has the right to give you a traffic ticket, for example. He also has the right to investigate to see if you're a threat to them or not. And that's what we want to do. We just want to prepare them in case there is something else. Give them those basically tactics for them.
Okay. You mentioned, so we talked about sovereign citizens. You mentioned white supremacy groups. Talk about that component of domestic terrorism. And when does it cross over from ideas into domestic terrorism for that group?
Right. So we have different groups, just like with any other program in the FBI. So domestic terrorism, we look at sovereign citizens, we look at militia extremists, we look at white supremacy, we look at black separatists. So what defines a white supremacy is, you've maybe heard of like groups that basically they claim that their biggest thing is the race. A lot of them is religious based. They go into the Christian identity, belief. Some of them actually look at the Bible as the main book to look at. And they transgress this book by not actually following it correctly, but by creating their own beliefs on that group. What gives us the right to look at them is when they have this tendency of hate, right, against people, but then they take the act of violence. So we believe that they may take an act of violence. So when we look at individuals, again, it's not just because of what they believe. There's a lot of groups out there that they can claim they're part of the Ku Klux Klan or they're Aryan nations. But that doesn't give us the right to look at them. It's when someone comes as a complaint, or maybe someone within the group says, this guy's too radical, he's going to go kill someone. When we hear about those people, those complaints, then we want to make sure he's not going to do something crazy.
So how often do you get complaints from the inside of a group like that?
Well, one of the things we want to do is we want to talk to these groups. So we have an active approach of talking to some of the leaders so that they can come to us, because based on history, they don't want to be the ones that are arrested in the future. Sometimes there's people that just join a group and they think it's too radical for them, so they'll come and they'll talk to us. Or they'll talk to the local police officers and they'll talk to us. That's how we get the information.
Is that frequent?
Yeah, believe it or not, it is. But we also want to put sources. So we want to recruit people that we know can infiltrate some of these groups just to let us know there's something crazy going out there. So that's one of the things we want to do as well.
So you have an undercover program for that?
Well, Undercover program would be a little bit more drastic once we identify someone that is potential threat to the public. Then we would want to look at that. But we want to do, when we talk about sources, it could be just a simple citizen. So it's just maybe be a liaison with them. We can maybe not someone who you classify like a confidential source, right? We also have those, but those we want to put in places where we can investigate them. So again, we have to be very careful about First Amendment. We can't just put sources on groups without any predication, anything that we can think be towards force or violence.
Right. So me complaining about my neighbor because of his YouTube channel is one thing, but if I'm seeing my neighbor in his backyard doing some things which may or may not be legal, at that point, it would be a good time to talk with you.
Exactly. And if you would see anything like that, then the FBI would be coming and talking to you. And we want to make you feel comfortable. And if we feel you can continue to report on that individual, we might do that. But if we at any time feel you might not be safe, we will look at other means to identify and follow up on those individuals.
Let's look at the makeup of the different, and I think that's one slide back, the makeup of domestic terrorism. And for those of you listening on the audio podcast, we're looking at a pie chart, and the biggest group appears to be militia at 33%. Is that accurate? And then bombing at 10%. Can you explain this chart for me?
So, yes, this is for the state of Utah, Montana, and Idaho. So for the Salt Lake Division, we cover 3 states. So the way we split these cases, based on some of the events that have happened across the couple of years, most of our cases were militia. We do also show bombing. Bombing is very reactive. So if you hear someone calling a bomb threat on a school or federal building, we have to investigate those. We typically work with the locals. We send our bomb techs. They clear the building, make sure there's nothing there. But in many cases, we have to work those cases until we find who did it.
At 10%, is that the percent of cases that you were called on, or the percent of cases that you were called on that were legit? Because I know that a lot of bomb threats are just somebody left something where it should have been left.
So these would be cases that were legit. So we actually have someone calling a bomb threat hoax. We would call it a hoax, or there was actually a device, something that made it look real. They left, or maybe they threw something at a building. The people called it. They thought it was suspicious. We investigate that because that takes a lot of resources. It's a lot of taxpayer money when you have to evacuate a building. The businesses lose money when they don't have the ability to work too. So we have to look into that as well.
Okay, so we've talked about militia, which is the largest component within those 3 states. Mm-hmm. Bombing. What makes up the rest of the pie?
So white supremacy is WSE. That's low. Basically, we know there's a lot of people that are believing in this, but we don't have enough predication to look at them.
2%.
It's only 2%. Animal rights and eco-terrorism, that's very low as well with 2%. There's people that believe within these groups that the government doesn't have the right to control them, so they'll go and cause harm to some of these corporations that are within our territory. So we work with these corporations to find out if there's any loss of what the harm has been caused, and then we look at these individuals, see if we can prosecute them.
So that would be eco-terrorism.
Correct.
Would fall within that, or as far as the animal rights groups, this would be the folks who feel like animals have rights, therefore I'm going to go destroy this mink farm.
Exactly, that's a good example.
Okay.
Yes, but there's other types of facilities here within the state that they can go and attack.
Like
There could be a farm, or they could go and maybe contaminate milk or something like that. So that's we just want to make sure that everybody's protected. And we work with our W&D program, our agro-terrorism program, to make sure that we have a good liaison with these corporations.
And rounding out that pie chart is 6% sovereign citizens.
So sovereign citizens, again, it's a concern. It's been growing. It's not as big here in the West as it has been on the east side of the United States, where you have other groups that are more radical. But with the whole militia movement, a lot of these militia individuals are also sovereign. But when we look at the threat, we want to identify if this is an individual that's going to be filing a lot of documents. We call it paper terrorism, where their focus is mainly putting liens on officers or on judges or individuals. So it's economical loss. Or if they're actually planning on creating their own militia and, going with force to kill someone. So that's why we have more militia cases. It's a bigger threat for us.
There's a lot of conspiracy theories on the internet, and it seems to be that there are more and more as time passes. Is this becoming a bigger problem because of the ease of information on the internet?
Well, I think it's our duty as citizens and just as human beings to verify all the facts. And I think that's the problem with a lot of people. We see something on the internet, we believe it, instead of doing the research. And that could go with anything we see on the internet, right? Yes, there's a lot of conspiracies. There's always been conspiracies that have been displayed, but yes, you're correct. The fact that they're on the internet and everybody can read them, it can start becoming an obsession to a lot of people. And that's where you tend to go into this hole, and then it just becomes bigger and bigger. Before you know it, you're wrapped into it, and it's hard to get out of it.
All right. Well, Supervisory Special Agent Juan Garcia, it's been fascinating.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.